Hello. The topic for this interview is child protection and child rights from an international perspective. Ms. Karen Flanagan AM is Child Protection Senior Advisor and Advocate for Save the Children Australia. At the international level, she is a member of the Child Protection Global Team Steering Group, which determines child protection policy and practice direction across 120 countries. Karen is widely acknowledged as one of Australia's foremost educators and practitioners in the field of child sexual abuse and child abuse prevention. She was also appointed a member of the Order of Australia AM for service to the community in the area of child protection through contributions to policy and program development in legislative reform. Save the Children is guided by a vision to protect the rights of children and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. They make a difference to the lives of millions of children. They serve children in areas such as child protection, health, education, and emergencies. So hello, Karen, welcome. Thank you so much.
Hello, Augustus. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed.
You're most welcome.
Nowadays, international discussions are focused on issues related to climate change, security, energy, and health. How does Save the Children raise child protection and child rights in global conventions and conferences?
We do this in a number of ways. Firstly, we operate in about 128 countries across the world, and in my role as a child protection technical advisor, we try to mobilize funding and bring it to attention of the various countries' governments what the rights violations are for children. My area is ending violence against children, so I'm particularly focused on getting children out of institutional care, reducing violence in the home, all forms of physical punishment, abuse and exploitation, reducing early and forced marriage, and any violations of children's rights to protection. And we also design programs that advocate to governments at all levels in every country that we work to improve things for children. And that most importantly includes budgets for children, because we can come up with legislation, policy, reform ideas, but with no money or no government commitment to uphold it, Save the Children can give money for so long, but we can't give it forever. So it's about introducing and helping governments see what the priorities for children in those countries are, and then making sure the community is on board and, reducing harmful practices, etc. And then getting them to sustain their budgets so that international development no longer needs to be relied on.
Yeah, so in a recent tweet, you highlighted a major headline. Less than 1/4 of Australian aid is invested in children. Why is this so? What do you suggest to improve those figures, and how does Save the Children get host governments to prioritize child protection and child rights?
The work that you're referring to is the Counting Pennies report. We did 2 reports. So this second one is the follow-up to the first Counting Pennies. And we realized in the child protection thematic area that the least international development, or ODA, was being spent on child protection. So we went to home donors, including Australia, and said, how much do you spend? And they, even in Australia, they couldn't even tell us, because they don't have a code for child protection, nor do they prioritize it in strategy. They are spending money on child protection, but it's because Save the Children chooses to use that donor's money in that way, not because they have a dedicated strategy to ending violence against children. Now, of course, many governments will say, oh, of course, protecting children is critical to our mission, but they're not actually strategically prioritizing it. And money is going in all sorts of other directions to other areas defense, industry, the arts, but we keep saying, but you haven't dedicated a specific fund for ending violence against children. Hence the global partnership to end violence against children was formed several years ago, and Save the Children is a member. And our job is to mobilize resources from the government and the private sectors to prioritize ending violence, because if we don't end violence, there's no point in educating children, there's no point in saving lives if you're not protecting them. They will not reach their full potential.
Yeah, that's very true. So how do you know whether your program is successful, whether it's regional or country-based? That is, what are the typical metrics involved in that? And how do you balance those regional indicators against the international requirements for child protection, child rights in general? Yes.
Well, I suppose on a macro level, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals. And for my area, child protection or ending violence against children, we had to fight really hard for the SDG 2030 goals to get 16.2, which is end violence against children. And it's not even a standalone goal, it's a sub goal of the Justice and Peace goal, which is 16. So I was one of the people as representing Save the Children at the global level with UNICEF, Child Fund Plan, World Vision, etc., the big child-focused organizations. So we mobilized to say we need a sustainable development goal for everybody to work towards. So by 2030, and there are indicators in that which we've all taken on board, which inform our monitoring and evaluation and evaluations. But we also have our own sets of global indicators for each breakthrough area, and child protection is one of 3 breakthroughs for Save the Children, education and health being the other 2. Now we work on a range of other things: climate change, poverty reduction, gender equality, disability inclusion. We work on all of those things, but the 3 big thematics are child protection, education and health. And within each of those themes, we have a whole suite of tools for monitoring and evaluation, indicators, results, outcomes, outputs, etc., log frames, you name it. And we have common approaches to our work. So in child protection, we've got parenting without violence. So it's an evidence-based package and an intervention that we do in communities with children's families and their whole system and government. And we have measures in place to measure our contribution. So then in 2030, we can all get together and hopefully have used those same indicators to measure how much violence we may have reduced in each of the areas we're working.
Yeah, that is good. That's a very good way of seeing progress, especially over years. So what about...
It's not as easy as it sounds, though.
Yes.
It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yes.
Data collection is so critical, and many countries and governments don't have proper data collection systems. So you're relying on each of the INGOs and different people. But if we at least use the same indicators to, work towards, we're on that pathway. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah. So how do the institutional engagements for Save the Children work? So take partnerships with INGOs, think tanks, civil society organizations, or you may be getting the private sector to meet their corporate social responsibilities in protecting children.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll answer the first bit. So we do engage with all the major institutions, the United Nations and all the many organizations within that, UNICEF being a primary one, of course, for us. On the humanitarian side, we're linked in with all the major institutions, and we collaborate with all the other INGOs, Oxfam, World Vision, Humanity, Habitat, you name it. We do consortia, and we often do intersectional responses and inter-agency responses to humanitarian disasters. We work with the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, and of course we work with the private sector to try and raise funds to do innovative programming that maybe governments don't have an appetite to do. We have the child rights business principles that we've developed to guide corporates in their work, so they do no harm to children, and that they check their supply chain. So I'm very involved in the modern slavery legislation. I was one of the people who advocated for certain forms of child abuse and exploitation, institutional care, orphanage trafficking to be included as forms of modern slavery. So we engage with governments and private sector on other abuses, child labour, etc. But we use the child rights business principles to help them not just meet corporate social responsibility. It's much, much more than that. It's about children being central to any, whether it's a new road being built or fishing industry. What are you doing to benefit children rather than take from that community? What are you actually doing to give them the jobs, empower them and enable them, rather than just taking their land or their forests, etc. So we do work on both sides.
Yeah. So in fact, on policy decisions,
and we like to get money from you. Sorry?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't get what you said. You don't like to get money for?
Yeah, I think there's a delay on the line. This is what's causing this. Sorry. I just said that we work on we're working with INGOs, but for proper development and sustainability of our interventions, we need the private sector to work with the government and to keep the money flowing. And then that the charity, the old welfare approach, we should no longer have to do that. It's about helping communities stand on their own feet and industries giving them the jobs so that they no longer need people like us. But we provide a lot of the technical support because often the workforce, they don't have social workers, for example, to do the child protection work. So we're training and working with the academic and university staff to make sure that the workforce is fit for purpose to do that work, because child protection is a reasonably new sector in international development. So there's many different angles. We work with the entire system and ecosystem around children, family, community, schools, and government institutions and the private sector.
Yeah, so on working with government institutions, policy is something very important, and inspired policy is also major. So you mentioned that Scotland was very successful in banning physical punishment of children, and you said that that was a great policy to emulate. So how does that process work in terms of emulation of policies from abroad? Yeah, so there's research.
Well, firstly, let me say Australia is not that progressive on that particular law. And I have attempted many times to advocate that we have a law that prevents adults being able to physically punish children. And it's not that we want to criminalize parents, but we want to teach the community and create awareness that hitting children and yelling and screaming them isn't good for their brain development. It actually doesn't change their behavior. In fact, it makes it worse, and it is against their human rights. So we want to educate rather than have a law that criminalizes parents. That's not really what it's about. But Scotland's been on a journey, as have other countries like New Zealand, etc. But there are many, many countries who have introduced this law, but very few white Anglo-Saxon developed countries. So that's why it's great that Scotland has done it. Ireland has done it. I think Wales is on the way, but Australia, US, no, we're a long way off. And it's because certain governments think we shouldn't interfere in the privacy of the home. But yet we do. We have child protection legislation that allows us to remove children, and particularly Aboriginal children, from their families. So we have to be consistent. So I've been involved in child protection work for 35 years, and I have advocated and had laws and policies enacted, but ending physical punishment in the home is the hardest one of all. And yet, 70 to 80% of children experience this form of physical abuse in their own home. Parents think that's normal discipline. The word discipline means to teach. It doesn't mean to punish. So a lot of our programming and our common approach, Parenting Without Violence, is our way of educating communities, because if you educate communities about what's good for children, and children will do much better that way, and parents feel better about their parenting, then the law is secondary. But you must raise awareness before you introduce the law. Otherwise, people, there's a backlash and people push back and get angry that you're telling them what to do. But it is fundamental for child protection for adults to stop hitting children. If we hit another adult or assault an adult, it is a crime and there's a consequence. But we can hit children every day, belittle them, and it's accepted. And yet they're little more vulnerable and they're supposedly in need of our protection, and yet we do that to them. So we need to correct that. And it's a global campaign and it's a hard campaign, but we're winning. But Australia, no, we're not near it yet. We're not near it, but we're trying.
Yeah, so this was very enlightening, actually, on both the research and awareness front. So you mentioned that now that research and awareness are just really important to actually reach parents and reach people in general, to make any change in terms of child protection. So this is great. This was actually all the questions I had down. So thank you again, Karen, for agreeing to be interviewed and taking the time to do this. Thank you so much for that.